Hi, welcome to my first ever YouTube video. What business do I have making a YouTube channel? Literally none. But I just started a book talk and I'm having a hoot and holler over there. I'm just having a difficult time condensing all my thoughts and feelings about the books I read into tiny little bite-sized pieces. So, enter YouTube. I can yap forever on here, and that's what we're going to do today. Let's talk about everything I read in January. I read 10 books in January, which feels so good because I was in quite the reading slump in both November and December. But here we are, we're starting off the year strong. And not only did I read 10 books, but I read 10 books that are kind of outside my normal taste, which feels even better. I'm getting a bit tired of reading romance books. I love romance books, don't get me wrong, but I've just read so many. The plot is just jumbling together and I can't distinguish any of the books. So we need something fresh. We need to switch it up a bit more, and that's what I'm aiming to do in 2025. So, without further ado, the first book I read not only in January but in 2025 as a whole was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. This is a very popular sci-fi book, and I gave it 4 stars. It follows Dr. Rylan Grace. He is a scientist, and he wakes up from a coma with amnesia on a spaceship. The spaceship is in space. He is floating through space, and he quickly discovers that his two His two astronaut friends did not survive the coma trip in space. So he's all alone in space. Literally my worst nightmare. I was a bit apprehensive going into this book because not only is it sci-fi, very much outside of my normal genre, I thought it was going to be boring, but it was not boring. I also was expecting it to be a bit more clinical, but it was very heartfelt. It was a lovely surprise. I had a lovely time reading this book. It is pretty sciencey, but it does a really great job of explaining all the science that's going on within the book. Obviously, it's science, it's sci-fi, science fiction. Girl, get it together. Anyway, the science language they explain very well. I thought it was very digestible. I don't know how realistic or accurate the science is. I'm not a scientist, but I had a lovely time reading this book. My only qualm, and part of the reason why I rated it 4 stars and not 5 stars, is the ending. The ending felt a bit disconnected from the rest of the book. It didn't feel realistic. Yes, this is a work of fiction, so nothing's really realistic. But the ending, it just didn't jive. It didn't feel like it fit the rest of the storyline. All in all, though, good book, for sure. Definitely a great book if you've never read science fiction. This was my first ever science fiction book. This book held my hand and was like, it's okay to read science fiction. Go out into the world. Okay, next book. I then listened to, shout out Audible, What in the World by Leanne Morgan. Leanne Morgan is a comedian. I enjoy her comedy. I saw this on Audible and I was like, why not? I love a good memoir. This is her memoir. I didn't say that. Whoopsies. And it follows her in her early life and also as a mother and wife, while also being just a funny gal and an aspiring comedian. I think listening to this book enhanced my reading experience. Leanne Morgan herself narrates it, which is so fun. I love her accent. The way she says what in the world really scratches an itch in my brain. But I don't think it really made a lasting impression on me, so I gave it 3.5 stars. But I love listening to a good memoir. I don't think I've actually ever read a memoir. I listen to all of them. I do like Leanne Morgan's comedy. I think she's funny. I was expecting this book to make me laugh a bit more. It was like pretty lighthearted and a little giggly, but I didn't think it was that funny, which was a little disappointing. That's on me, I guess, for going into the book thinking I was going to be hooting and hollering. But yeah, it was good. It was fine. 3.5 stars. Now, number 3. Something about me, I love a hockey romance book, okay? So I picked up Pucking Sweet by Emily Rath. This is the 3rd book in the Jacksonville Rays series. In this series, oh my god, this is the spiciest series I've ever read in my entire life. It's actually kind of insane that this is a published book. Anyway, this entire series follows a fictional NHL team, and each book follows a different couple. Or throuple in this case. Yes, the 3rd book follows a throuple. So yeah, this book is crazy. It's very, very spicy. The entire plot is smut, which is great every now and then, you know. This book, it's just like on a whole nother level. Okay, I love a little smutty romance book sometimes, but this is I don't even have the words. It's insane, okay? It's corn. Genuinely. It's erotica. But I still enjoyed it. Okay, I gave it 3 stars. Let's move on. The fourth book I read was Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting by Claire Pooley. I adored this book. It was so delightful. This follows a group of people that commute every single day together on a train. My favorite thing about this book was the range of characters. I find a lot of the time I pick up a book that has representation and that's a character's whole personality. It feels very fake. But in this book, it just feels very natural. It feels like real life. Like, of course, these people who are on a train together every day commuting are not the same age. Of course, they're not the same race, the same gender, the same sexuality. Like, it feels natural. I really appreciated that. I also loved that you got different perspectives throughout the story. The main character is, of course, Iona. You're in her head the most. I really appreciated everyone else's perspective as well. Also, I partially listened to this book on Audible and then I read part of it on my Kindle. And the audiobook was also lovely. I loved the narration. All in all, great book. Highly recommend. It's about friendship and kindness and building connections. It wasn't a very complex story, but it was perfect. Okay, moving on to the fifth book I read, Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney. If you don't like Sally Rooney, okay, you just don't get it. Is the miscommunication infuriating? Yeah, that's the point I fear. Okay, that's the whole point of Sally Rooney. This is the second book I read by her. The first book I read was Normal People. Very similar shtick. Miscommunication eats you alive. But this book follows Frances and Bobby. They meet a couple, Melissa and Nick, and it is about them getting to know each other and the things that happen after. Sally Rooney has such a great way of writing characters. They're very complex, they're very well rounded, they do bad things just like me and you. It's such candid inner monologues that I very much appreciate. I also listened to this book. I listened to so many audiobooks this month. And the narration, again, was lovely. I love a narration with an accent. Iona Iverson's Rules for Commuting was in like a British accent, and then Conversation with Friends is an Irish accent because it's set in Dublin. I love this book. I love Sally Rooney. Also, just fair warning, Sally Rooney is a self-proclaimed Marxist, and that comes through in her writing for sure. Am I a Marxist? No, but I can appreciate her writing and the larger metaphor throughout the story. I think I like this book just as much as Normal People. If you haven't read Normal People, read it right now, or at least watch the TV show. I love Marianne and Connell. Are they awful? Yeah, kind of, okay, but I love them. All right, and the sixth book I read this month was Shut Out by Avery Keelan. Like I said earlier, I love a good hockey romance book, okay? Sadly, this was not a good hockey romance book. This was just a hockey romance book that I was very disappointed by. I was having a good time. You know, it was a very typical hockey romance story, but that's okay. And then it just dropped off about 75% of the way through. I just felt like the story was going nowhere and the conflict was so unnecessary. But to be fair, this was right around when Onyx Storm was coming out, and the only thing I wanted to read was Onyx Storm. So I don't think I gave this book a very fair chance, but oh well, I didn't like it. Just for a little bit of perspective, I read this 2 weeks ago. I already forget the main character's name. I don't really remember the plot. I just know it was hockey, and I was annoyed. So yeah, I gave this 2 stars. Sorry, Avery Keelan. This is actually part of a series. It's part of like an interconnected standalone situation. I read the first book like 4 months ago, I think. I also don't remember what that was about, but that's okay. I don't remember half of the romance books I read. Like I said, the plots just all jumble up together. I read them way too much. And then this is the second book. Both of them were on Kindle Unlimited. And yeah, it just fell flat for me. Moving on to the seventh book I read this month, Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This is the third book in the Empyrean series, also known as the Fourth Wing series. If you have never heard of this, number one, do you live under a rock? Number two, it's about dragons and a war college. It's a very, very popular romantasy series. I'm having a hard time reading this book because I recognize my inability to be subjective since I'm already so invested in both the characters and the world from the first and second book. It's hard to look at Onyx Storm as just Onyx Storm and not rate it as part of the series. Like, this book could have been a steaming pile of garbage and I still would have ate it up, which is low-key what happened. Steaming pile of garbage might be a bit harsh, but I was a wee bit disappointed with it, but still rated it 4 stars. It's hard to give a description about this book since I don't want to spoil the first or second book, so here are my thoughts and feelings. First things first, I feel like we're in the exact same spot as we were when I started the book. I feel like not a lot happened. Well, a lot happened, but really nothing happened. Number 2, Violet and Xaden are pissing me off. I'm annoyed. Those are the two main characters. And I'm also annoyed because we have to wait another like 4 years to figure out what happens. Which I guess is good because when you rush a book, it kind of turns out Dookie like. But as a consumer, you're like, dang, I gotta wait a million years for this to figure out what the heck happens. Anyway, I'm done talking about Onyx Storm. I tried to film this part like 8 times and I'm getting frustrated. So, number 8, Belladonna by Adeline Grace. This is the first book in the series. I'm not sure if I'll continue on with the series, but I did really enjoy Belladonna. I gave it 4 stars. It follows a girl named Signa, and she is alive during the Victorian era, maybe Regency era, I'm not for sure. And of course, like many protagonists out there, she's an orphan, of course, because who has parents in books? And she can see death. Death is personified in this world. And she's the only gal that can see him. No one else can see him. Being an orphan, obviously she doesn't live with her parents. She first lived with her grandma, she died. Then she lived with her uncle, he died. Then she lived with her aunt, and she died. So she's moving in with some distant relatives, the Hawthorns. They're very well off. They have a very fancy schmancy mansion, and there's a bit of a murder mystery that goes on while she's there. This is allegedly a YA romantasy. Towards the end, it was not giving very much YA, but I still had a lovely time. The thing I really liked about this book was the setting. That's what really did it for me. It was very vibey, a little spooky, but kind of cozy at the same time. I don't know how I feel about the main relationship in this book. It feels kind of sus to me, but overall, had a great time. But again, I don't know if I'm going to pick up the second book. The second book is Foxglove. Okay, number 9. Also, can I just say, it's so hard to talk for this long. Sweet Jesus. Okay, number 9, Belljar by Sylvia Plath. I started this book a year ago. I set it down and just never picked it back up. I don't really remember why. But I'm glad I picked it back up. This was a great read. I mean, it's a classic for a reason, and I gave it 4.5 stars. If you've never heard about this book, it follows a woman, Esther, who is going a bit cuckoo, and it is told from her perspective. One thing that really surprised me about this book was it was quite funny. I'd heard that her writing was a bit witty. By her writing, I mean Sylvia Plath's writing was a bit witty, but I was genuinely giggling to myself. Maybe I just have a terrible sense of humor. I don't know. I'm going to read you a quote that had me laughing my ass off. Maybe it was just the shock factor of it all. I'm not for sure. Also, trigger warning for self-harm. It goes. I rolled onto my back again and made my voice casual. If you were going to kill yourself, how would you do it? Cal seemed pleased. I've often thought of that. I'd blow my brains out with a gun. I was disappointed. It was just like a man to do it with a gun. A fat chance I had laying my hands on a gun. And even if I did, I wouldn't have a clue as to what part of me to shoot at. Girl, Sylvia! Okay, moving on. The real kicker about this book is Sylvia Plath herself ended up unaliving herself in 1963, I believe, and that was when this book was published. So, kind of wild. I really enjoyed her writing style, though. This is her one and only novel. She was a poet, and I've never read any of her poetry, but I would love to after reading this book. The last book I read in January was Annie Bot by Sierra Greer. This is like a dystopian sci-fi book. I actually listened to this book on Audible too. I listened to so many books this month. I had saved up like a bunch of credits on Audible. Anywho, Annie Bot is about Annie, a robot, who would have thunk it, in this futuristic world where there are robots from this company called Stella, and they have multiple purposes. There's different types of robots. There are nanny robots, there are cleaning robots, and there are cuddle bunny robots. So cuddle bunny robots is what Annie is, and they're used for intimacy purposes. And this follows Annie and her owner slash partner, Doug. Specifically, this follows Annie in her transition to becoming autodidactic. Autodidactic is essentially becoming more human-like. They have more feelings, and they're not as structured. I think the narration of this book was great since the voice is quite robotic. You really feel like you're in Annie's head. I had some complicated feelings about this book. You really have to grapple with what makes someone human and how they should be treated, but I really enjoyed it. That is everything I read in January. Hopefully in February I have just as a successful month as I did in January. And yeah, have a great one. Also follow my book talk.